Okay, my name is Devin, and I am here to give the guided um, viewing of my exhibition titled Discomfort Food. Um, essentially, I got the idea because I myself enjoy food as a source of comfort when I'm feeling down, and I was really fascinated by this idea in some of the art that I have viewed over the course of this class, wherein we sort of flip that on its head and we make it, discomforting and or uneasy and disgusting. And I think that the reason that was so interesting to me is because it didn't make me dislike the art that I was viewing. It made me curious and interested, despite the disgust and the unease that was generated by these pieces of art. So to that end, I want to start with carcass of beef, and I apologize, I'm going to be butchering names throughout this entire recording. I'm going to say Soutine by Chaim Soutine. Um, to give a little background on Soutine, he grew up in Lithuania, but eventually moved to Paris to try and become an artist. But unfortunately, being an artist, as now and in the past, um, um, it did not pay exceptionally well unless you were, lucky. So he um, ended up suffering from malnutrition and starvation for a lot of his life, and he ended up getting stomach ulcers and other problems because of that. So he ended up making this piece to sort of reflect on his interesting relationship with meat, because he couldn't eat meat. So he would buy these carcasses to paint, not to eat, because he couldn't eat them because of his stomach problems. Um, and one interesting story that apparently was documented is that as he was drawing this carcass of a cow, it began to rot, and the neighbors complained, and the authorities showed up, and they were like, "Okay, you can keep painting this, but you can't smell like this." So they recommended that he inject it with formaldehyde to keep it preserved. At which point, um, it started to like discolor the flesh, so he had to reapply fresh blood to get the vibrant colors that he wanted to have in his piece. And I thought that was fascinating. Um, Next we have leftovers. I will be brief about this one. This one's by, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this name again. Agnieszka Rodowitz. Um, Essentially, she was living in Warsaw, and she noticed that there was a significant amount of discarded food all over the streets in Warsaw. So she ended up taking pictures of this food to try and to share it and document it and try to encourage the people of Warsaw to stop throwing away so much food, because there's a whole bunch of people, thousands and thousands of people who are suffering from lack of nutrition and food in Warsaw alone. So she wanted to draw attention to that. And I think that her specific framing and images do well to provide that sort of feeling of discomfort and unease and make people get introspective about the food that they throw away. Next, I want to speak on Edward Liddell and his works. And I want to I'll be a little bit brief with his as well. I want to specifically talk about this thing I noticed in his work that fascinated me is that he likes to draw fowl, and he'll draw them with their neck at this very strange angle, sort of, because they've been killed and you break the neck. Um, and it's for me personally, it elicits this feeling of discomfort, to see the duck or the other fowl with the neck twisted at that impossible angle that like it can't be alive. And if anything, it almost makes this painting feel more alive to me, because the duck is clearly dead and can't be moving. So in other still life paintings, it sort of feels like if you were to snap your fingers and make the painting come alive again, it would have movement. It would, whatever. But the duck feels very dead. And so it sort of feels like this is a live, like you are looking at something like a that's actually like not frozen in time. At least that's what it draws for me. And I thought that was interesting, that this sort of unease at the deadness of the duck made it feel more like a real image to me. which is why I included this specific, because I noticed it as a theme in some of Mr. Liddell's work. Then next, I want to talk about Carla Dolci's work, specifically Salome with the head of St. John the Baptist. The reason that I picked this one out, it's actually kind of hard to see in the image here because it's much brighter than when I first viewed it. But when I first viewed it, it was a very much darker version of the painting. It wasn't as well lit, and I thought that the St. John the Baptist was actually in her arms here, like sprawled in her arms. And I didn't notice that the head was being served up there. So I thought that was really uneasy because it took me a second to realize it. No, that is in fact his head on a platter. And that really triggered that sense of unease, of disgust in me. And again, it didn't make me less interested, maybe more interested in the artwork. So that's why I really liked this piece, because for me, it really hit that whole unease leading to interest thing right on the head. And then we'll talk about Petrus, oh gosh, Shantanus. His name might be the one that I struggle with the most. He was not a particularly well-known artist, but he worked in the Netherlands and he did a lot of this still life stuff. But what was fascinating to me is that the still life stuff, previously sort of almost a lot of still life feels like it could be a desk somewhere, like a kitchen counter, whereas his is just sort of like, it looks like a working table. Like they've got, a globe and a timepiece and an orange some of his other pieces have astrolabes. And I really like that if you're looking at it from a distance, if you're sort of passing by, it's got pages and it just sort of feels like a space where people work. And it's unnerving to me that the animals and such, like in this one right here, this one's a little more obvious, but it just sort of feels like a working space until you look close and realize, oh my gosh, that's a dead bird in there, I mean, it sort of brings that unease, and that feeling of like, oh my, like that is not normal. There's dead animals in this workspace mixed in with these books and these astrolabes and this trumpet, So I really I think that triggers that feeling that I'm looking for of like, there's something wrong with this image. What is it? Oh my gosh, there's dead animals here. It sort of makes me scrutinize the image more, and look deeper. Next, I want to talk about The Last Supper by, hold on 1 minute, Carolina Zenowicz. Oh gosh, I totally butchered that last name. So this probably doesn't look like much, but as a microbiologist, this was near and dear to my heart because she likes to work with biology and science and transhumanism and philosophy and stuff like that. So she took, this is an image of a plasmid, which is a special kind of DNA that can insert into living cells. So she took her own piece of DNA, which is the red section, and she put it in this plasmid along with some other things that are necessary to facilitate moving it into somebody else's cell, including ampicillin resistance and a point of origin. So this looks like it was stolen from E. coli and modified with her own gene. And then she inserted this into yeast and used it to brew beer and drank the beer. And essentially it was like a delving into auto cannibalism and the sort of pitfalls of genetic modification and stuff. And while I am a proponent of genetic modification, I think that this is a fascinating art project, sort of exploring the intricacies of genetic modification, and eating oneself, and how that can be uneasy, uncomfortable, sort of this feeling. Next, we will speak on Dorota Palaska's Suavity and Despair. And I think it's pretty easy to see why I picked this one. It's a bunch of bug chocolates. They look like chocolates. They've got bug pieces in them. Chocolate is yummy. Bugs are not, generally speaking. one thing that I really liked about this piece is that she left it very she's sort of just like, this is the piece, take what you will from it. And I was reading online, and there are a bunch of different people that have different sort of views as to what this might actually be about. There's a lot of like talking about like the shame of eating chocolates, how, people want to eat chocolates, but at the same time they might feel shame because they're trying to lose weight or conform to societal norms. So the chocolate starts to feel, gross or uncomfortable or uneasy or nasty, like the bugs. There's another interesting one I saw that essentially talked about how eating bugs is more common in Asian culture. So maybe it's talking about the meeting of and the friction of Asian and Polish culture. But I think it's open to interpretation, and I really like just especially this one. I love the shadow. So it's a very sinister shadow that it casts, and I just love um, the fascinating silhouettes, the uncomfortable silhouettes that get made by these pieces of art. And I really like just I think it's fabulously well done. Um, I believe second to last on our list, we're going to talk about Carolina Konopka and her performance art known called On Birthday. This is a picture. There's a link to the full performance up there. Essentially, I'll describe it in short. What she does is she's on stage and she eats this cake and drinks this bottle of champagne. And as she is eating it, at first it seems very innocent, and then slowly it becomes clear that she's not enjoying herself. Her face gets puffy and she gets swollen and she almost looks like she's crying. And essentially, it's a commentary on how she's always on her birthday been forced to celebrate by eating cake, and she doesn't even like cake. So she's just exploring these ideas of like, should we hold people to the standard of celebrating, you know, in the way that we think is right on their birthday. Some people don't even like to celebrate their birthday. She doesn't like her birthday. I have friends that don't like to celebrate their birthdays, except she wanted to explore this idea of feeling beholden to celebrate your birthday and eat cake. And I must admit, watching the performance art, it gets very uncomfortable and uneasy watching her force herself to eat this entire cake. And it really triggered that sort of unease response that I was looking for, that made me interested, even though it was uncomfortable and uneasy to watch. And I saved what is, in my opinion, the best for last. We have Jonas Schern and his piece, Traces of a Cannibal. And I've got two other pieces that I will unfortunately not have time to show in this guide. Um, but essentially, he had a very different art style when he was coming up as an artist. He did lots of paintings, and they were geometric and colorful, sort of like stained glass. Um, but then, unfortunately, he was a Polish Jew during World War II and was in a ghetto that was set to be liquidated, at which point he was shot in the back of the head. But he survived and fell into the mass grave where he was forced to lay still for 10 hours before he escaped to Budapest. And his art style was never the same afterwards. He started to use animal bones and oil paints. And as you can see here, and he assembled these strange three-dimensional sculptures. And a lot of his art was exploring the idea of the cannibal inside of all of us, of the animal inside of all humans, and sort of this idea that as we do war, as we murder each other, it's sort of like cannibalism in a spiritual sense. And I think that because of his personal experience, the art that he invokes, while abstract, is deeply moving and unsettling and uneasy, and explores these concepts of cannibalism as a more higher plane, not just the act of cannibalism of eating flesh from one's own species, but also from destroying one's own species, from committing horrible acts against one's own species. And I think that Jonas Stern really elevates the concept of this cannibalism to a higher level. And because of that, his artworks are deeply moving for me and very deeply trigger this idea of unease and interest generated because of unease. And unfortunately, I'm running out of time, so that is all that I have time for today. But I hope that you enjoyed my exhibition. discomfort food and delving into the idea of generating interest through discomfort and unease in food art.